Hi, everyone. Welcome to Or Something, the podcast where we talk about the origins of things or something. I'm Kristen. I almost said I'm Karla. And we're off to a great start. Yikes. I'm Kristen. And this is Karla.
Hi. The real Karla.
The actual Karla. Oh, boy. So we had a bit of a break last week. How was your week off? What'd you do?
It was fine. I missed doing the podcast, but...
I know, right?
But guess what?
What?
I'm slightly more prepared this time.
Whoa. Stop the presses.
Also, I'm going to say this now. Mm-hmm. We're going to sound like AM radio. We're going to sound a little whatever, because after the nightmare I just experienced with these cables and microphones, I'm like,
yeah,
nope.
We have some tech problems. Whatever, we're amateurs. Leave us alone.
And we're going to stay that way.
No.
Right?
Well,
what?
Okay.
Great. My
also, how would you know what AM
up.
radio sounds like? You're
Silence.
an avid listener to... I wish I even had an example of, like, some funny example of...
AM radio actually makes me so angry, because you listen to it and it sounds so bad, and I'm thinking, really, in today's day and age? Like, I clearly don't understand the point of AM radio.
I didn't know it still existed. I guess for farmers.
You don't like to talk radio. For farmers. No, that, like, sports guy's always on, and I'm like, what did he say?
Don't have internet. Oh, my God. I always associate, like, CBC. So in Canada, we've got CBC. There's, like, specific... And I just associate that with AM radio.
Yeah, and that's still around.
Like talk radio.
Yeah.
Which is basically podcasting, but worse? I don't know.
What do you mean? You get angry callers in who rant about the government, even if they're talking about hockey. It's great.
Good point. Oh, okay, we went off on a tangent.
And good news.
What's the good
Even
news?
though this has no place in our podcast, whatever. Flynn, my nephew, he's getting a puppy.
What?
Yeah, it's official.
Oh my gosh, what kind of puppy?
It's going to be an Irish setter mixed with a poodle.
What?
They have such character, and they're so cute.
So cute.
Yeah, so I'm like,
yay! When does he get it?
November 5th.
Oh my gosh, is it a boy or a girl?
They don't know yet. They have like third choice of the litter, so
okay.
Yeah, they're kind of.
So they'll go and pick whatever.
Yeah.
Does he have names picked out? Is he excited?
If it's a boy, his mom is adamant that the name is Chester.
Okay, I like that.
I like Chester. I think it's cute. And girl, we have no idea. Flynn thought of Zelda.
That's actually pretty cute.
Cute, yeah.
Yeah.
And then his mom thought of Peaches.
Oh my God. Of course she would.
But then I told her a neighbor a few houses down has a dog named Peaches, or had a dog named Peaches.
Are you serious?
So,
How is that a dog name?
How is
why
it
are
not a
people
dog
doing
name?
it?
Come on, Peaches. Peaches.
Peaches. Come here, Peaches. That's just
right?
creepy.
It's adorable.
No.
Whatever.
Don't
How
do
was
it, man.
your 2 weeks off?
Oh, good. My sister and I
That's
went...
enough.
You're such a smart ass. It was great, thanks. Jerk. Do you want to go first this week, or should I go first?
You're not gonna
I'm gonna get that. Well, you didn't want to hear about it, you bastard. No, my story has to do with something I did on my little vacation.
Ooh. Mm-hmm. Okay, you go first then. It's your turn anyway.
Okay, I'll tell people a little bit about my week since I was so rudely cut off. And I can
Someone
tell
out
you're,
there
like,
cares.
Holding yourself. Someone out there. No, nobody out there cares. So I had a week off with my sister. It was great. We went to the coast and drank a lot and ate a lot and did a lot of fun things. It was fantastic and relaxing. And we saw a bunch of bears, which was crazy. All the things. But one thing that we did...
because you associate bears with the coast. Because I'm thinking like California beaches for some reason.
It could be any coast. Yeah.
There's like...
We saw bears.
Bears running around. I love it.
We're in Canada. Listen, it's what happens here. just going to perpetuate a bunch of stereotypes.
But
and
it's
then
true
we
in
stayed
this case,
in Igloo. It was fine. So one of the things that we did was I went for the first time to get like a psychic reading done.
No.
And
I've
it was
always wanted to do that.
Oh, it was so
I don't
much.
believe in it, but I would love to.
See, and I don't think that I really believe in it, but I really enjoy it and I really want to believe in it.
Right?
The same thing with ghosts. Like, I don't think I really believe in them. I've never had any kind of ghost encounters or anything like that, but I really love the idea of them.
Me too.
And logically...
And
like,
horoscopes even. I'll be like, oh, this is totally, And I'm like, really?
Like, what is that? The fact that we want to kind of, like, be into stuff, but we really secretly know it's not a thing. Like, I love the idea of past lives. Like, the lady told my sister that she had a past life. She was some empress, and the name Constantine kept coming up. I was like, what?
Whoa.
That's so cool. I was just told that I had druid energy. I'm like,
ooh.
Because I like to wear moo-moos, and I sound really sad and depressed all the time. Moo. Well, they just wear long robes all the time, don't they? I don't shave.
Oh my
That sounds about right, actually. It's pretty accurate.
Yeah, why wouldn't she kind of go into it?
No, she did. She was like, there's a lot of empathy there, and like very kind of stoic. Like, people view them as like kind of soft, but they're actually very strong. And I was like, okay, that's pretty accurate.
Aw.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. Very mystical, whatever. I'm like, cool. That's awesome. But I loved it. It was so much fun. And I ended up buying my own pack of, they're not tarot cards, but they're like these oracle cards. And it's about animal spirits. And it's so cool. And I've been doing little readings for myself every day. It's kind of become a little bit of a ritual.
So you're going to do readings for me this whole hour?
You betcha. We've changed the whole theme of the podcast.
Right? Everyone tune in to find out what's going on in my life according to this card reading. Imagine people did. They were like that invested.
They're like, this is a great idea. Wow. We have more listeners on this episode than any other. So one.
And we never follow up.
Yeah.
Did it come true? I don't know.
Who knows? Who cares? Every episode is a completely new theme for a podcast. We like to keep people on their toes.
Well, don't make me wheeze laugh, because we'll extra lose our one viewer yet. God.
Yeah, they're watching us right now.
Just go, because I'm dying.
I know. Okay. So it made me think I am going to talk about the origin of tarot cards.
Ooh. Oh,
girl.
Actually.
I know, right? So my sources for this are Wikipedia, of course, and a website called learnreligions.com, which I thought was interesting that it came up for tarot cards.
Yeah, that is.
Because I don't connect it with religion. And
yeah.
I mean, I guess occult stuff is considered religion in some instances. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. I think rabbit hole, we need to start a drinking game for people. Every time we say rabbit hole, they have to take a drink.
I don't know why we didn't call the podcast
wasted.
Down the rabbit hole, or just rabbit hole, because
if we should. Okay, let's go back. Let's change the name of everything. Let's start from scratch. Never. It's too late.
Sorry, I think I was making shusha sound. Shusha sound?
No, I think
shushing
you're fine.
Sounds. Okay.
So tarot cards, now we know them as, or now in the Western, English speaking countries, they're typically only used for divination purposes. So for telling the future, for doing readings, all that kind of stuff. But they did not start that way. And in a lot of other countries, they still are not really used in that way.
Ooh.
Yeah. They started out as playing cards, as versions of playing cards.
No.
So, I know, isn't that crazy?
I love that.
So playing cards first came to Europe in the late 14th century, and a lot of people say they most likely came from Egypt. Some people say areas of Turkey, that they came over from that area anyway. The first record of playing cards being used in Europe is from 1367.
Really?
And the basic pack of cards contained the still current, like, 4 suits of 13 cards each. So
really?
that was, like, yeah, the original, pack
so
of cards.
surprising.
Isn't that crazy? There have been lots of variations throughout history. Some people said there's like a 32 card deck and, like, all these other things. But the 52 cards with the 4 suits was the very earliest form of playing cards that existed that kind of still is the most popular in most places, which I found so surprising. You would think that it would have changed a lot over the years.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
the centuries.
Whoa.
The first documented tarot card packs were recorded between 1440 and 1450 in Italy, when additional trump or triumph cards with allegorical illustrations were added to the common playing card packs.
They just have to throw in their allegories. You want to do a painting? Fine. Make sure it's allegorical, though.
And
Playing cards? Sure.
Yeah, and when I was just saying, like, adding it to the pack, it totally just made me think of, like, Pokemon cards or something like that, where you're, like, going to 7-Eleven and buying an extra little pack to add in.
Yeah, the kids are all scrambling. I want the death card.
Yeah,
Give me the plague card. Let's trade. Okay.
So these cards, these trump or triumph cards, were painted for wealthy families, primarily wealthy families, because they had to be hand painted by artists, and only the wealthy
It's lead
people.
paint, and they're all like,
They'll just die immediately.
the card said I would die. It came true.
Yeah, exactly. It's the death card in more ways than one. So members of the nobility would commission artists to create their own sets of cards, sometimes featuring family members and friends as the trump cards. And because it was something that, like, the cards all had to be hand-painted, it was only rich people that could afford to hire an artist to do it. And then they were quite elaborate and quite, distinct. I think it didn't really become much of something for the masses or something that, like, for the lower people until the printing press came around and they could mass produce cards. And then it became something that was accessible to everybody.
Would the poor people have time to play cards? I know it's in all the movies. It's all they do in, like, the alleyways and the grifters and or whatever they're called.
Well, I mean, it got dark pretty soon. What else are you going to do? I guess, like, all your chores inside? I don't know. Darn some socks. Yeah. Oh my god. Okay, so in both France and Italy, the original purpose of tarot was as a parlor game, not as a divination tool. So French tarot is a trick-taking strategy card game played by 3 to 5 people using a traditional 78-card tarot deck. So the tarot decks are 78 cards. And this game is the second most popular card game in France. Like, it still is very popular in France. They don't use tarot cards as fortune-telling stuff, even though a lot of it originated in France. So I'll kind of go into where... Let me find it here. So the tarot deck has 78 cards, and now it's split into, like, 2 distinct parts. Okay. So there are the trump cards. So that's 22 cards without suits. So examples of that are, like, the Magician, the High Priestess, the Empress, like the Chariot, Death, like all those cards. Okay. And later, once the divination side of things kind of gets developed, those cards are called the Major Arcana. Oh. So it means the greater secrets. Arcana is like another word for secrets. And then the rest of the deck is 56 cards divided into 4 suits of 14 cards each. So there are 10 numbered cards and then 4 court cards. So the King, Queen, Knight, and Jack. So that's called the Minor Arcana, or otherwise known as Lesser Secrets. So that's like the tarot deck. So in France and Italy, they had an actual parlor game that was using this 78 card deck. but it was just for game purposes purely.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked up some of the rules of it, and it seems so elaborate and so cool. I actually kind of want to go buy a proper tarot deck now to try to play it. I think that would be so fun. But it sounds very...
well, it's kind of like the Pokemon cards, literally. Like, if you ever actually try to play the game, it can get pretty complicated where you're like, I mean, the basics are kind of there, but it's like, there's a lot of reading involved. Each card is like, you know, does its own thing. Yeah. And it's like, why did the rule book is like 80,000 pages long. And you're like,
well, that was just like starting to go into it. I was like, this is super complicated. And so a lot of people liken it to like bridge or something like that.
Right.
Which I know in itself is quite complex and is something I'd love to learn how to play at some point. But I think you'd really have to commit to it for a little while to really, truly get a full enjoyment or understanding
excellent
of it.
At bridge, and it's
Are
like
they?
I grew up watching them play with my aunt and uncle, and it was like just the coolest thing.
Oh, cool!
Because they would just play for hours, and I'm like, "What are you saying?" And I tried learning just a few years ago, and I'm like, "Nope."
Damn! I should get your mom to teach me how to play. That would be.
I don't think she remembers now. You can forget pretty quickly.
Oh, really? I was going to totally make fun of, like, she's not an idiot. She's not going to forget right away. But apparently. What do I know? Obviously.
Well, if you don't play for a long time, I think it's kind of...
Yeah, that's true.
Like any card game. I don't even remember how to play Go Fish half the time. I'm like, huh?
Yeah, but you're a special case.
How dare you continue?
Okay, so it appears that divination with playing cards started to become popular in the late 16th and early 17th century, but in a much more simple form. Like it was just with the playing cards. It wasn't really like as in-depth as it's become now.
Yeah.
So the origin of the word tarot derives from the Italian tarocchi, or tarocchi, I don't know how they pronounce it. The origin of which is uncertain, but tarot was used as a synonym.
I like it.
Oh my god. Synonym for foolishness in the late 15th and 16th centuries, which made me laugh. That's the only reason I put that in there.
Funny.
And if you think about it, like with the origins of it, where you're just playing a game, like it originated there as a game.
Yeah.
So if people are like, oh, that's just foolishness, like how you were saying, well, did they have time to play? Well, like only the rich people probably had time to play. And it probably was considered something that wasn't, of any kind of higher pursuit, right? Like they're not learning a skill and they're not doing anything. Yeah. It's just pure foolishness. You're just playing a game, right?
Yeah. And it's amazing how easy it is to fall into that where, like, you and I, we created a game in the office we used to work at, like the mailroom. Yeah, paperball. Oh. And how quickly, like it took us an afternoon. We got so into it though, right? We wrote rules.
Oh my gosh.
We created like 50 rules.
To be fair, we played that game quite often. And I would say it originated in the hallway of our high school.
You're right.
Remember the Cove?
Yes, you're right. But like that being said, right, like I'm not surprised that it's like the 78 card game with like a huge, rule book, because it's so fun to just get into it.
78 cards, it's crazy. Like that's a lot of cards. So the earliest evidence of a tarot deck being used for cartomancy, I love that word for some reason, shows up in 1750. In France, it became very popular in Paris in the 1780s, and Jean-Baptiste Alliette, he was a French occultist, was the first to popularize tarot divination to a wide audience in 1785, and he was the first person to issue a tarot deck specifically designed for occult purposes around 1789.
What? So it's down to they know a specific person.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. He
is therefore known as the first professional tarot occultist known to history who made his living by card divination. Oh. Mm-hmm. So in 1770, he wrote a book under the pseudonym Italia? It's his last name spelled backwards, so I was like, really? You're real deep there. Why am I making fun of him? He's done more than I have. Has he? So he wrote a book about, using regular playing cards, the usage of the regular playing cards kind of in an occult way, and talked about a spread, which was with strictly assigned meanings to each card in the regular and reversed positions. So, but that's with just regular playing cards, not an actual tarot deck. So he wrote a book about it, and it kind of started becoming more popular. And then in 15 years later or whatever, he ended up creating his own, or 19 years later or whatever, creating his own actual deck that was specifically only made for divination.
Man.
There were some other guys around. Like, there was another guy who wrote a book, and I guess they were kind of rivals. Like, so this guy in 1785 wrote a book about how he was like, oh, tarot came over from Egypt. Like, it's all based, a lot of people talk about how it came over from Egypt, and it came over from all these like ancient cultures because they really wanted to associate some kind of power with it, but there's no actual evidence of that happening.
Yeah. So
it's just interesting. So that guy had written a book about it, and then this guy, I'm using the real technical terms, Aliette Jean-Baptiste.
Yeah.
He kind of they were kind of sparring back and forth a little bit, and he responded to it saying like, no, it's actually like this. And then, they just kind of both were going back and forth. And then Jean-Baptiste, he was like, no, I'm going to make my own thing. And he kind of paved the way for tarot stuff. Although now there's like a few different tarot card deck types that are used by
grass type, bug type.
Well, no, there's like this, I wish I'd written down these names because they're probably significant. And I saw them when we were in the store, but one was like the Waite, I think is one of the names, like the last name. And it was basically just decks that were created by people who were doing it very early on. And they created a certain style and a certain thing. And then they had like a partner that would illustrate the deck with them. Ooh. But it was kind of all around the same time in like the 1780s, 1790s. Some of them, like, it became pretty popular and like grew and grew. And then it had different revivals at different times. Like in the early 1900s, again, it came back again pretty strong. And then there were all these different people. It's quite an elaborate history.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't really care about all that. I just kind of wanted to get to like why, like it started out as a card game, just a basic card game. No other thing. Yeah.
Well,
an elaborate card game. But then how did, I more wanted to kind of delve into how did it become tarot cards, like how we see them now. Mm-hmm. So when he first talked about the spread of how to lay the cards out, and then the meanings that were assigned to each card in the regular and reverse positions, these characteristics are still central to tarot divination today. So the stuff that he laid out in his very first book in 1770 are still the very basic tenets that run through the card reading today.
Okay.
In the preface for his book, this book that lays it all out, he explains that he learned his system from an Italian. But it's still unclear how much of the ideas in the book were actually his. But he doesn't say who the Italian guy is.
Oh.
So it's interesting that it was very much in Italy and France that these tarot cards were happening, and it was like a thing.
Yeah.
In France, it was much more the divination side. In Italy, I think it very much remained to just be like the card game. Right. But the card game kind of like ended up not being as popular there. But in France, tarot, the card game is still very popular there.
Huh.
And even in Quebec, here in French Canadian stuff, it's very popular. They even mention that.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, now I'm all like, let's play.
I know, right?
The next 3 episodes will be dedicated to us trying to figure it out.
Exactly. It'll be frustrating to listen to. Please join us.
I've invited a bunch of spirits into the house. Oh, God.
Yeah. And they're just getting mad at us because we don't know how to play the cards properly. You idiots. So in 1781, Antoine Court is the guy. He's a French-Swiss Protestant clergyman and occultist. That's quite the mouthful. He published a book saying that the tarot was actually an ancient Egyptian book of arcane wisdom, but there's no evidence to support any of that it has an Egyptian lineage at all.
I wonder when that whole Egyptian craze happened, because it was like, I feel
like
it was 18th century, I thought, but
well, I feel like it was probably around that time, because a lot of the early cards that were done for the tarot, like even the Aliette guy, he a lot of the imagery on his cards, the art was very much based in Egyptian kind of aesthetics. Even though he said it's not from Egypt, it's not from that. But I think I think Egyptian stuff was popular at that time. And so I think that's, they were just feeding off of that. It's a business like anything, right? They're like, yeah, Egyptian, come on.
You're such a natural salesperson.
I know, right?
Yeah, Egyptian, come on.
How am I not a millionaire? So that's the basic history. Like I said, I didn't delve into all the other stuff that comes after that, because it was so, there's a lot of history there, and a lot of different people, and a lot of people who believe very specific things. It all happened around the same time.
Right.
And all the other guys came after this guy. So I was like, I'm not going to delve into that too much. But it was really interesting to me when I was looking at the history of tarot cards, because it was very dependent on where you get your information from. Like when I went to the very general sites that just covered general history of things, a little bit more matter of fact, it's what I was just telling you about. Like that's the information that I found. There's not a lot of like distinct stuff of like, there's no evidence of anything coming from Egypt.
Right.
There's no evidence of these things. You can see the origin a little bit more clearly, where you're like, okay, people were just playing cards, and then the rich people were like, we want to add in these trump cards, and we want them to look like us, and we want, like they kind of played around with it and built the deck. And like that to me seems like a lot more of a logical progression. And then somebody else, like they start using cards for different things, and then it leads to the divination side of it.
Right.
But when you look at sites that were very specific, like there's like tarothistory.com, and like there are sites that are like dedicated to this. Yeah. It was crazy reading them. First of all, they're all different. They all said different things.
Oh my gosh.
And they all were obsessed with the idea that it's this ancient and mystical practice that has been handed down through the centuries. Some people were like, it started in 1200 and then it was passed here and it was passed there. A lot of them tie it to Egypt. A lot of them tie
it's such a livelihood for people now.
Yeah.
To do the readings. So, yeah.
Well, I think it obviously would make you feel better to think that
some ancient,
that it has this ancient mystical connection to it, right? I kind of think I like thinking of it that it's a tool to just be a little bit more present, see the world in a bit of a different way. It's just a tool to tap into the stuff that existed. I'm not saying that, I don't necessarily believe in the mystical realm all that much, but I'm not saying that hasn't been around for all these years, and that there aren't people practicing all of the divination stuff. It's just not necessarily with cards. The cards, I think, is just a tool. Right. And I think you can easily track the development of that tool, you know? It was so interesting to me looking at those sites where they were obsessed. They were like, they were going on and on about, they were extremely vague. They didn't really have any specific dates, unless they were the dates that I had already gotten from very general things. Those were the dates, and those were the specific details that they cited. But all the other stuff, they couldn't really specifically say anything, but they put it all out there anyway. I was like, okay.
Yeah, well, that's like every single politician in the history of the world. That's literally what they do. Yeah, basically. A few facts, mostly garbage, and people vote for them. And I'm like, Oh, so it's just this common thread in all of humanity.
But like, it's how our brains work, right?
And that's so crazy.
Oh, you
it's
said
so
two
funny.
things that I totally agree with and that I know for a fact are true, or they sound like they're pretty true. Mm-hmm. I'm on board. Like, sign me up.
That is so crazy.
It's interesting. It was funny because when we were at this place that we went and did our readings at, I bought a little pack of cards, but they're not tarot cards. They're oracle cards. And so I was like, okay, they had all these sections of traditional tarot cards and then oracle cards. So I actually had to Google it in the store saying, like, what's the difference between them?
Yeah.
And tarot cards are very traditionally, they're always 78 cards in a pack. They have the same things, like the same cards. It can be designed differently. And I think there are ones, like I said, where there are 3 different general types of them, but they're all generally along the same lines. You know what to expect. It's a lot more specific, and if you're going to do readings with them, it's a little bit more specific in how you do it. But with the oracle cards, the packs can be any size. It can have like 10 cards. It can have like 150 cards.
Can I just say, I was sitting here hoping you would say that, because it sounds like the Pokemon card packs. Where you don't know what you're getting. It's not a specific thing. I'm like, please be like Pokemon, because this is the funniest thing ever.
It exactly is, basically.
I love it so much.
Somebody should do, though. Oh my gosh. Okay. Copyright, trademark, TM. Nobody can steal this idea. It was on this podcast first. I'm so paranoid about people stealing my business ideas. We should create an oracle card pack that you can buy the supplemental cards to it.
Right?
Like you do, like kids do, where it's like, oh, add this in. Or like Cards Against Humanity has that, where they're like, oh, here's a little whatever.
Yeah.
Extra raunchy pack, or like a 90s pack or whatever, and you can add it into your deck. How fun would that be?
You have like a 300 card tarot deck.
Yeah, why not? Well,
let the parlor game commence.
Yeah. What's that other card, that Magic the Gathering or whatever? Isn't that like a card game? You can buy cards for it. I don't know.
Probably. I don't know. I've never heard of that game.
Similar to Dungeons and
Dragons. I live under a rock.
Anyway, that's the end of it. That was the origin
that
of
was so
tarot
cool.
cards.
Yeah. I never ever. You know, it's so funny, because I was thinking, like, when we first started this, I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm going to struggle to come up with topics. But it's amazing how things come up almost like just every few days, where I'm like, oh, that's another thing. I don't know where that came from, or the origins. I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's just this, like, my original list that I was making has just snowballed. It's like this huge long thing.
It's honestly daily. And now that people know that I'm doing this podcast, everybody's like, you should do that for the podcast. And I'm like, okay, write it down.
Well, I was thinking we could do like a little, I'm telling you this now, whatever, like a little mini one where we have just like short ones, because some of them, they're not going to have a lot of research. Like one of them that I tried doing, it was like, it just kind of gave me an answer right away, and I didn't have much to talk about. But
that's a good idea. We could do like a little mini episode earlier in the week. And do like, because that was...
Or just an episode dedicated to like short little ones.
Just short little ones, just a bunch of short little ones. We could, Anyway. I know, it was funny. I have this whole list of ones that I want to do, and this tarot cards wasn't on there, because like none of it was really resonating. I'm like, oh, I don't really feel like doing that this week or whatever. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, this just happened to me. Why don't I look up tarot cards? Because I have no idea of the history of it. And I love that it is a card game. I'm like obsessed with that idea, and now I want to go buy...
I know.
A deck of tarot cards.
I want to
play this game.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we have the world's longest spread, and it's all just death. I quit.
Why do I have 7 death cards in my tarot card pack?
It's at the bottom of the rule book. This never happens. If it does, you're doomed. Sorry.
Yeah. Make sure you have goodwill. I have to make extra eye contact with the people in the store selling it to me, so if I can see if they feel nervous or not.
Oh my gosh, I love it. All right, so speaking of totally changing your topic mid-week or whatever because of something, on the news. Oh, can I go? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I'll just bust in there.
Do it.
Yeah, on the news, they said that William Shatner is going to go into space.
Oh my gosh.
And
will he have to wear his original Star Trek uniform?
I hope so.
He better.
Right?
He won't fit into it.
He's like 90,
Wear
I
it
think.
as a bandana.
I love
is
it.
He must be.
Yeah, he's like, yeah.
Okay.
So, it got me thinking of Kirk and Spock fan fiction.
Oh my gosh.
That was slash fiction. And I knew, I was thinking about it. I'm like, I know the origins of slash fiction, right? Which I'll kind of cover briefly. But I don't actually know how far back fan fiction goes.
But didn't it start with Star Trek stuff? Oh my gosh, tell me everything.
Okay, so there's actually quite a few articles. Like Vice.com had a really good article. The Atlantic had a good article. Where they were going back, looking at, who else? Oh, and The Guardian, they did one, a whole slew of them, of like the forgotten early history of fan fiction, because fan fiction is basically getting more acceptable, more mainstream, but originally started as like where it started getting more popular is like through the science fiction kind of like conventions and fan clubs and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So people in about like the 70s, 80s, 90s, they only associated it with like something that like total super, like one guy, he said it's something that like only like geeks would go to conventions, nerds, right?
Yeah.
Star Trek stuff, they'd be made fun of on the news if they ever covered these conventions. But then only like the super extra nerdy geeks would do like fan fiction. So it was even like dweeby.
So even like within the geek realm, it was like only the geekiest of the geeks.
Yeah, so it had
a
bit of a thing, I guess, like the tarot thing where it goes up and down, where it's like, okay. But, so it became more popular. But,
so what exactly, just sorry to interrupt you, for people that might not know, like, what is the definition of fan fiction?
Yeah, I was just gonna...
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, because, like, who knows if I would have had a definition. But, basically, like, how one person put it is, it's the reworking of another author's characters, right?
Oh, okay.
But the problem with that is, I'll just read this little blurb. This form really only appears for the first time in history with the invention of legal authorship in the 18th century through copyright and intellectual property laws after the invention of the printing press. Oh. Right? So what they wanted to, like, they kind of were drawing a line where they said in the past, people would use stock characters like the demon, the wicked stepmother,
right.
And they would tell stories, retell them, like they would retell like folk stories, right?
Right.
And they wouldn't necessarily write them down because there was no, like, again, printing press or like property laws or anything, right? But and so one famous example is like Shakespeare, where he, even though he was writing stuff down, technically a lot of the stuff was like patrons paid him, like they said, like, hey, write a play with these characters or whatever. Yeah. He would even like just take other people's ideas, right? Yeah. And kind of like make a play out of it. So it wasn't really his own.
Yeah,
but you can't
but he still put it together.
Yeah, but you couldn't really call that fan fiction because back then, like, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Basically, like, fandom, like being a fan is what's so critical here.
Yeah.
Right? But anyway, going back in time. So people...
I think you're not, as a fan, you're not trying to change it into your own... I mean, you are kind of writing your own story, but you're doing it with a different purpose. You're not trying to, like, do it with the intent of reselling it. And
right, yeah.
You know.
And so with the old thing, like, just the... So if it's, like, this idea of just reworking another author's characters, you do have to kind of, like, draw the line at, like, you know, the intellectual rights, right? Like the... copyright stuff and publishing and all that stuff, right? So now, like, so how do you define fan fiction? Is like, is literally now, as people know it, it's just fans taking characters from like beloved stories, books, popular culture basically, right? Books, TVs, movies, and they just basically continue the story. One person wrote such a cute, like they defined it in such a cute way. They said, readers began to find ways to continue the adventures of their favorite characters and share those stories with other enthusiasts. So it's like this, like fans continuing, you know, the story.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they would rework it so that, because if they were unsatisfied with the ending of a movie or a book or whatever, they change that ending and they'd be like, here. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry about that. But it's really hard to define it because like the definition changes. It's like, huh? But yeah. So anyway, so I need to go back. Where's my thing? I had, my thing is gone. Okay, so Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift was written in 1726, right?
1726?
Uh-huh. And, oh my gosh, part of my research is over there and I can't move.
Go get it, go get it.
Okay, hold on.
Do, 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 do. I don't know why it's the Jeopardy song.
Okay.
But it...
All right, I'm useless. Sorry about that. Okay. So, this is a bit lengthy, but it made me laugh so hard. So I want to read it, okay?
Okay.
It's from The Atlantic. So, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, that's so hard to say, published in 1726, marked the beginning of this movement. Not long after its publication, readers started to imagine its hero, Gulliver, in circumstances that either were only briefly alluded to in the text, or they themselves invented. The more shocking the revisions, the better. Many stories took the form of what was essentially fan art. For example, the famous engraver William Hogarth, remember Hogarth?
Oh,
provoked and amused with a graphic representation of Gulliver getting a Lilliputian enema. Though outrageous, Hogarth's rendering was consistent with Gulliver's character, a play on the original hero's delight with the size of his own excrement in contrast to the miniature world of the Lilliputian people. From the start, artists were using the form to explore social taboos and sexuality, which is still the case today. Hundreds more fan-authored works followed, including a touching, if bawdy, series of poems by Alexander Pope, in which the shipwrecked adventurer's wife, barely mentioned in the original, complains that her husband is never at home to do his duties by her. When Gulliver returns from his final adventure, he has become so disgusted with the human race that he hides from his family. The fan-written Mary Gulliver was, understandably, put out by her husband's newfound abstinence. So, even like way back in 1700s, it was this way for people to be like, to kind of explore sexuality and taboo topics and like, these like, poor Mary Gulliver who's being ignored by her husband. And it's just like, okay.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. It's so old.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I love that.
It's funny. So to kind of explain it a little tiny bit historically, academics thought the 18th century novel invented realism, that was its big thing, right? Like its big contribution. But now they're saying, and realism, just as a definition, it's like where in novels, instead of writing about kings and, like the wealthy, they would start writing about common people. Yeah, so it wasn't like just heroes and nobility. It was like...
But I think that's the thing. Like, I think that's why people want to do fan fiction, because they're like...
Yeah.
They're trying to be a part of what's going on. Like...
Yeah, and that's what academics are starting to realize, like, oh, no, actually, it's a way to sort of live vicariously through these characters. Yeah. Explore your own sexuality, your own taboo, like kinks or whatever, or like romantic stuff, or, any kind of drama out there, like angst, and it's, because the actual, I'll go back to that. Sorry, it's such an interesting topic. I'm like, all over it. But anyway, so characters who the reader knows aren't real, but who seem like they could be. That was kind of what 18th century novels, they think it's more like, right? Where the reader could start seeing themselves in it. Okay. So that's pretty like important too to this whole thing. It's not just, I love this character, what's going to happen. It's very much like they feel like they can be a part of something.
You want to be a part of it. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and so another famous example, which I thought was kind of interesting, is Jane Austen. So she herself based Wickham from Pride and Prejudice on one of those just like common, I don't know what you'd call it, like a just archetype type thing of the rake, right?
Okay,
where that's something that was from lore, like folklore, traditional kind of stories passed down.
Yep.
That's not really fan fiction though, right? Because it's just not a specific character that she was like borrowing or referencing. But there were Jane Austen fanzines and fan clubs. They called themselves either the Janeites or the Austenites.
At the time that she was writing?
I think so, actually.
Wow.
Let me just check. Maybe, well...
Or maybe a little bit later?
Might have been a little bit later, because here it says the first published Austen fanfic, published already, was in 1913, and it was called Old Friends and New Fancies, an imaginary sequel to the novels of Jane Austen by Sybil Brinton.
Oh my gosh.
Right, so this goes way back.
Oh my gosh, that totally makes me think of one of our favorite movies, Lost in Austen.
Right.
Where, I mean, it's a terrible movie, but it is so fun to watch because it's about a modern girl that goes back into, like, Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And it's so fun because you're like, what would I do if I was in Pride and Prejudice?
Okay, speaking of self-inserting.
Uh-oh.
So in modern fan fiction, like, communities, you quickly become aware of something called Mary Sue. It's like a character that is perfect. She's better than everybody else. Everybody loves her. And it's kind of like a no-no. You don't put yourself in stories where you're like the best thing ever. You just don't do that. But they did do that. And it started back in the 1920s with Sherlock Holmes fan fiction.
No way.
Mm-hmm. So it started, like, there were these societies where they gathered together. So they didn't have the internet, right?
Yeah.
But they're gathering together. They debated stuff. They debated like stuff like Sherlock Holmes's cocaine use and what kind of life he should have and all this stuff, right? And they would read their own stories to each other, so their own versions. And a popular story type was like self-inserting, like Jane meets Sherlock Holmes or whatever.
Right. You
know,
and then people just got sick of that because who else wants to hear about that? It's just about you being
exactly. And I'm sure there's a good way to, like, you know, sort of subtly self-insert, right?
Yeah.
Because then
I think everybody does it to a degree with fan fiction.
Right. And then you can kind of relate to the text and you're like, oh, yeah, that is like my thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Like my high school experience of Harry Potter. Anyway, sorry. I don't think anyone experiences what fan fiction characters actually go through, because it is, I think, a fantasy thing ultimately. But whatever, I digress. So that was already, going up to the 1920s, right? 1930s and 50s. That's kind of where fan fiction sort of got sucked back right into like just purely sci-fi stuff.
Okay.
They had their little science fiction clubs where they would share their fan fiction with each other. Apparently Isaac Asimov was a part of such a club.
Oh, no way.
He went on to be published, obviously.
Oh, my gosh.
Then Star Trek happened. And this is huge. This was a huge change because conventions started coming out. Also, the thing with TV is everything became global, right? So it became this like global love for Star Trek. So people would start reaching out to each other, and like computers started becoming a little more, accessible to just normal people, right? Yeah. And so they'd go on and try to communicate with each other, like with Usenet and that kind of thing. I don't know. That came a little bit later, obviously, but there were fanzines. Like there was Spock and Alia fanzine, and that had a famous like fan fiction story in it. I don't know if that's the one, but I'm going to segue just quickly into slash fiction. So slash fiction, the definition, it's like you'll see a name, like like a pairing. So basically it's like two friends from whatever movie or TV show or story, like Kirk and Spock. And it's like Kirk slash Spock, which means that they're going to be they're going to be paired up in the story, and it's going to be a sexual thing. Now, for the longest time, slash fiction was like just like gay lovers sort of thing, but now it actually is any sort of kind of pairing, which I didn't realize. Like, but yeah, so that's kind of intriguing because I thought all fan fiction was kind of basically like, you know, romantic or pornographic at some point, right? And it's like, because most of it is, you go into Harry Potter fan fiction and it's just like, most of it is rated E or M, mature and explicit. Like, okay, right? And that's why people love it too, right? They're just all like going nuts with their fantasies. But like, yeah, with the Kirk and Spock thing, it was very specifically just like, you know, the male thing. And then there's the femme slash, which came a little bit later. I think it was more popular with like Buffy and X-Files and stuff. But yeah, I'm not sure about that. I was going to
say you had to have female characters in order for them to be like, for there to be enough femme slash.
True.
There was one female on Star Trek.
Yeah. But so the reason, so the slash fic, I guess, like the actual term came from the fact that like maybe back in, I don't know why they used the slash wave like originally, but there was a book called The Ring, a slash fic novel, which was published called The Ring of Sochern, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, by Jennifer Guttridge. She did that in 1968.
Whoa. And
that story is Spock and Kirk end up on this planet. Spock goes into heat. Sorry. It's a type of heat. It's more complicated than that, but whatever.
Oh, no.
They have to do it or die, basically.
Oh my God. It's just porn.
It is. And they fall in love. And yeah, and I think like it is studied by academia, like fan fiction in general. Like now it is, because it's not so, it's just for losers and it's just, you know, like fans writing like wish fulfillment stuff. It's like, but I'm still kind of like, yeah, it's great that they're exploring things, but like it is basically just porn half the time. But anyway,
it's interesting.
I don't want to judge it. Like,
I wonder if like back in the, like with Jane Austen stuff, if it was like erotic fiction, basically. Like I'm sure there were people who did that and delved into that.
Because the Gulliver's Travels ones were.
Yeah.
Right? And so they must have had like the classic.
So I think that's probably just because that's the stuff that's not talked about in regular books, right?
Right.
It's the stuff that's not shown in movies. It's, you know, it's sometimes maybe alluded to, but in such an innocent way. Like, so people are like, okay, let me fill in the blanks a little bit. Here's what I think should happen.
And it's like they're adding depth, even like, you know, with that Mary Gulliver. That's so interesting that somebody would actually think of poor Mary.
Yeah.
Like, and her newly abstinent husband. And it's kind of like giving her a voice, which is kind of amazing back then.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know. And so now
so
it's
interesting.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that like slash fic came out in the 60s, 70s, because that's when, you know, gay rights was like kind of, sort of, you know.
Yeah.
And like,
and
coming
you're
into the
looking
mainstream.
more at like the whole free love and
right,
like opening your mind to different things, and that's interesting.
And it's just like, now it's just, if you go onto the, like, their search engines and their filters are insane and complicated. The famous websites were, actually I should say, back in the day, so with the rise of like the internet and stuff, and the popularity of Star Trek and everything, and X-Files and that kind of thing, when people got on the internet, they created these small communities dedicated to fan fiction, but they were like specifically the X-Files fan fiction group or Star Trek fan fiction site. By 1998, that's when fanfiction.net, that's like one of the first, maybe the first site where all genres could like What's
you
that
could
called?
go and then just search for whatever you were
Yes.
into?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is that called? Like a, I forgot the word term for
Like
it,
a
but
database kind of?
yes. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was in like 1998 already. That's pretty like, well, I guess that's ancient for kids nowadays.
Well, I mean,
for
that's
me, it still
30
feels like
years
yesterday.
after. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
But I mean, that's technology, right? Like.
Yeah. But then what happens with that is that they were saying that a lot of the communities kind of dispersed, and it's very, like there are the pros and cons, right? Now everyone has access to it. It's more mainstream. It's not as like, people don't make fun of fan fiction writers really anymore.
Well, wasn't, what's her face? Who was it? 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight Lady? One
right,
of those.
yeah,
Wasn't
E.L.
one
James.
of those?
Yeah, she wrote, what was it? I think Twilight fan fiction that turned into 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And there was another girl, she did like a One Direction fan fiction, and she got like this huge publishing contract or whatever.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah. And so
I mean, some people are good writers, but it's also like, what the...
Well,
You're also
yeah,
not.
it's funny because in the... they were saying that back in the day with the 70s and 80s, you mostly had college age writers writing these stories, right? And the fans were trading them around at the conventions, right? Because they didn't have really a way to kind of spread it until the internet came along. And now it's predominantly high school kids, like younger kids writing, right? But it's always been like female dominated, mostly women, right? Yeah. Always. So
well, we've got something to say.
Yeah. And it's kind of, going like a bit of a segue, but not segue, side note, but how like it was a way for women to insert themselves into a lot of like more
male dominated.
Yeah, like fandoms, like comic books and sci-fi and that kind of thing.
I kind of wonder, this is a little bit of a side note, sorry to cut you off, but
no, go for it.
I kind of wonder if, because Greg and I just watched that documentary on Netflix about how females are underrepresented in the film industry as like directors and all that kind of stuff. Like they're not in any of those high power positions to actually direct any of the creativity, like, or make any of those decisions. Yeah. And it was fascinating to watch, but I almost wonder if that wasn't the case, like if there were more women that were able to tell the stories that resonated more with women, if there would be still as much fan fiction, or if it would have grown maybe in the same way, where people are like, primarily women are like, I actually think it should go like this, or I think it should be like this. I mean, obviously I think fan fiction would still exist because it's just, you see something and it sparks something in you where you're like, oh, did you see the way those characters looked at each other? Yeah. Wouldn't that be like a great storyline if they did this? Yeah. And then you actually take the step to write it and
it's not like you could fit everything into a single, like, even though Harry Potter had like 10 movies practically. Yeah. It's like they're never going to, go into like Lucius and whoever fic.
Yeah. I also kind of wonder if it's the whole female thing of like, it's never enough, like, or it's not good enough. So here's, like, I wish they would have gone in, like, I mean, if you look at what guys are into. Yeah. I mean, the porn that they watch is like zero storyline. Like, there's nothing. They don't need a story behind anything, right? Like, and I'm not even just sexually. I just think that it's not as much of a drive there to have a deeper storyline necessarily. Well,
Tiffany Haddish was just a guest on Conan, and she mentioned how it felt like to her that the guys that she slept with in her 20s, right? She hooked up with them like later in life and they still had the same moves, and it's almost like they just stick to what they know, like when they're 20, that's it. It's very simple and kind of formulaic. And I'm thinking, if more men got into fan fiction, maybe there would be like a lot more satisfaction everywhere across the board, because then they would explore their interests and their kind of like what turns them on and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, just open yourselves up to it. Like,
but see, I think the way that we're biologically made, I don't think that men require that I think it's so much more of a, like, sex is much more of an instinctual, but maybe not, because, I mean, there are people that are into the whole, like, domination and all of that stuff, which is quite elaborate.
And what if they don't know? And it's not critical to their livelihoods or anything to know, but, like... But I think, you know, and now it's, like, a really... you would probably see a lot more, like, so, like, LGBTQ, what are the, I don't know the whole thing.
Like, all the letters.
Yeah. There's probably much more of those kind of fics now, because it's kind of like a safe place to, you know, explore that. Mm-hmm. And I know people think, like, you know, we're a lot more open and everything, but I'm like, I'm sure there's a lot of kids who still don't, you know, really know what they're into or don't feel safe sharing it with people. Mm-hmm. And yeah, of course they're going to go to these fan fiction sites, I think. Like, a lot of them, you know, they're so popular. And
I think it's because you feel connected to the characters in TV shows,
and the community. The communities, because I still read fan fiction. I have fun with it. It's, like, just so... Some of the stories are so good. Like, really, really... They just draw you in, and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. It could be like, you know... You're like, why didn't they get a movie deal? Because it's not garbage, like 50 Shades of Grey. Because a lot of it is garbage.
A lot of it's garbage.
But it's hard to, you know, criticize, because a lot of it, there's a lot that isn't, where it's surprisingly good. And you're like, oh, like, I actually wish this person wrote just, you know, like a non... a quick note. As I was going through, so Anne Rice is famously a bitch about... fan fiction. She's like, no.
Is she really?
Mm-hmm. She was like, I hate it. It's stupid. Like, no, I do not want people taking my characters. Like, she just was like, and I think she even got people to, like, suit some people or got them to take stuff down. Yeah, try policing fan fiction. It's like, there's so much of it out there. But J.K. Rowling? Anyway,
I don't know.
I never know how to say her name. I see it in print, but I don't know how to say it. She's okay with it as long as they don't make money off of it, or and as long as they share it. And what's interesting is, even back way back when, in the 18th century, authors, some of them were ticked off that people were starting to steal their characters and write fan fiction.
Oh my gosh.
But a lot of them were like, no, we're fine with it as long as it's free, that you share it with others, and you don't try to make money off of it. We're fine with it. So that has remained consistent. The creators are like, so...
I mean, I wonder how I would feel if someone, like, took my stuff and created their own entertainment from it. Like, I'm sure you'd get a little bit worried that you're like, oh, well, if you're entertaining yourselves, you're not going to come back for more. But I also kind of think, like, how could you not be flattered by that, where it's like, people enjoy your characters and the world that you've created so much that they just want to stay there all the time.
Well, a lot of people said it's advertising.
Yeah.
They're going to bring in new fans.
Absolutely.
And new, you know, like, I read a Star Wars one. And it actually got me kind of intrigued in, like, the latest, like, one of those Star Wars. I don't like Star Wars, but, like, I was like, oh, maybe, you know, the characters are kind of interesting in this. And so I watched part of it with my nephew, because he's catching up on all the Star Wars movies. And I was like, oh, okay, I can see how people were into it. I'm still not obsessed with it, but, like...
But it gave you a different kind of viewpoint on it.
Like, I actually gave the movie a chance. Yeah. Just based on everyone's love for the characters. I was like, oh, this is really neat,
because I think that's something great about fans, is that it's like, it can be very infectious, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to be against something when people are so like, no, but it's so good because of this, this, and this.
Yeah. So, sorry, I was kind of like scream talking. I was so excited with this topic. I don't know why. I barely spit out half the stuff that I wrote down. I did all this research.
I kept cutting you off because I'm so excited
too. It's just this. It's so hard talking about things that I'm really interested in, because then I just fly in this big jumble.
Just go for it. Who cares? Let's do it.
But it's just such
This is
a
an
cool
AM
topic.
radio. This is a podcast.
I genuinely thought it was like, I just took it for granted. I'm like, oh yeah, it started in Star Trek. And I'm like, no.
I am shocked at how early it started.
Me too.
I love that.
Yeah.
In,
so basically
1729 with Gulliver's Travels.
1726. Yeah. So basically, to sum it, basically it was the publishing thing, like the invention of, you know, being like printing press and then fandom, and suddenly it was basically like instant, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, so makes me wonder about like before that, you know, I don't think people just retold like folklore. They probably...
Well, I'm sure there must have been something to prompt, like anything that's created, there's a reason for it. It's not like somebody was just like, oh, we're going to start copywriting things because we just feel like it. There's obviously something that prompted it because people probably were stealing their characters, like flat out stealing them and then doing other things with them.
Like Shakespeare.
Right? Yeah. And you're like, hey, you can't do that and make money off of it now. I came up with that idea, you know? That's interesting.
Yeah, but so it's a whole new world, and if anyone out there is still like, fan fiction stinks or it's for losers, it's like, it's not really. Like, the people who are writing it they're just fans, and they're exploring like goofy stuff and the comedy. Like, some of them are so funny, and some of them are like just practicing their writing. Some of them are, it's like therapeutic for them.
I just honestly think it's such a niche, like, that I know a lot of, I don't know very many people that probably wouldn't even know that fan fiction is a thing and that it exists out there.
Yeah,
it's such a huge
That's why I didn't even define it at first, because I'm thinking like, no, everyone knows what this is.
No.
And I'm like, no, that's not.
I know, like I'm thinking of people in my life and I'm like, nope, I'm sure don't realize that that's even a thing. And it's a thing that people do regularly. And there's a huge community of people connected to all different kinds of things. Like there's people for musicians that write fan fiction. Yeah. It's like, look at all the like David Bowie fan fiction that's out there, right? Like all of these things where it just these people, musicians or characters or famous people that just spark some kind of creativity in you and you want to see them doing something specific. Yeah. You know? Yeah. And usually, I mean, you get into the Mary Sue stuff where it's like, I want to see them fall in love with me.
And you get those wonderful... But it's not all that. Do you remember that Harry Potter one? We, I think, started getting into the slash fiction, just reading it. Yeah. Back in, what was that? University days, I think. This was like ages ago. And we read it because... for laughs, basically. Not in a mean way, but the grammar so ridiculous. Was out of control. Yeah. The one time that character said that Harry Potter, like, he froze. Oh my God. I still remember that. I'm like, what? And, yeah.
It was pretty funny reading amateur writing.
Yes. Like, I feel like a lot of it was amateur, where they didn't really have editors. Now they're called, I think, betas. And it's very, very... common that the works are edited and betaed, and it's like, oh, okay, like,
that's interesting. I bet you I feel like, I mean, it would take time, I would imagine, but I feel like at some point you're gonna start seeing little fan fiction things like coming up for sale, or like maybe not with all the copyright laws, but I just feel like it's gonna become something bigger. I mean, it already has. People do publish their fan fiction, and even though they probably, I don't know if they just changed the names or what, but one guy, he was originally sued by J.K. Rowling because he did a sort of sequel and he published it. Oh. And she was like, that's a little too close for comfort. Like, right. But then I think after some fan protesting and stuff, she backed off. Okay. I mean, I kind of get it, though, from her perspective, where it's like, no, this is what I wrote. Like, make your own, write your own damn story.
But then it's not her original.
Blotter went to Blogwarts.
But it's not, if it's a different story, if it's a continuation, I kind of don't mind. I think I wouldn't mind, because as long as it's like a sequel, I'd be like,
you know what? Because it's not, that you don't have control over it. Yeah. And I wouldn't want, because you don't have control over it, you have no idea what that person's going to write, and they're affiliating themselves with you and with your franchise that you've created. Right, yeah. So anybody looking up Harry Potter would also find that book and be like, oh, is this really what you believe?
Although, a huge thing in the community...
They make Harry Potter a neo-Nazi or something?
Well, the nice thing with the community is, like, the fans actually protect the works a lot. So some of them... they go too far, where they actually originally the original ones thought that fan fiction should only be written like in script form, not in prose. They were like, no, it has to be like the TV show. It's like, that's it. No, it's just a script.
Weird.
Yeah. And so you still have pockets of people who are like, no, it should be written like this. And the term canon comes up a lot. So if something is canon or not, that just means that like what's widely accepted to be, you know, true in that universe, like, or acceptable in that universe. So fans
like if you're working within the rules of that universe that's been created by the original
exactly. And people will take their works and they'll say like alternate universe or like not canon compliant, right? So they will.
I remember that, and you're like, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah,
you're like, "No, bring me back to Hogwarts."
And so people will be like, "No, like that's just going too far." Like especially if it's published, they'll be like, "No, that's garbage." Like, and it quickly spreads around the community. You can't really get away from it. So
yeah,
especially with YouTube and everything, all the opinions out there, right?
Yeah, everybody's got an opinion. I love that.
Me too. It was so fun.
So fun. I love that. I had no idea.
I know.
Early.
Yeah.
I think that's just such a testament, though, to people wanting to be creative, but not necessarily having the skills and tools to create a story completely from scratch. Yeah. That they're like, no, that really inspired me. It sparked some kind of inspiration. I'm going to run with it. Even, you know, like you don't have to start from scratch, you know? I just think it shows like how creative people really want to be. And
the really good writers, it's so fun to find their stories because they really, really keep with the characterization, right? Some of them you're like, it's barely an excuse. You know that people just are using the actor, like the way they look. And that you're supposed to just imagine them. But the characters are like, who are these people?
You're like, this is just your daydream. Please
Exactly. And you're like, oh, okay.
Nobody would ever say that, let alone that character.
Yeah, like Draco is a southern drawling cowboy or something. And you're just like, okay.
What is happening?
But then with something stupid like that, you're like, oh, this is dumb. But then if sometimes, I've never read something like that, but like, if I did and it ended up being actually really good, I'd be like, I don't care.
You're like, yeah, I could get into this.
A good story. You have to like suspend a lot of, you know.
That's so funny. Yay, anyway. I love it. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go buy some tarot cards so that I can learn this new card game.
And I'm going to try not to summon demons when I also play with tarot cards.
You're not just going to go read some fan fiction?
Do tarot cards even like summon demons? Like what?
I don't think so.
Oh my gosh.
They tell your future.
Oh, that's a seance.
Yeah.
Oh
go
my
get a
God.
Ouija board. A Ouija.
I'm gonna go be stupid.
As per usual.
All right. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.